Okay, well, welcome to the Macquarie Street Political Podcast. It's fantastic to have with me on the line today Senator Matt Canavan, joining me from Bundaberg in Queensland. Matt, welcome to Macquarie Street.
Great to be with you here, Lyle. Thanks for the opportunity.
Mate, we really appreciate it. It's been a lot of things we want to get through today, but it's been a big week in Canberra. Yesterday, the Religious Freedom Bill was withdrawn from the Senate. Tell us from your perspective what you saw from your vantage point right there in the Red Chamber.
It didn't make it to the Red Chamber, Lyle, in the end, but obviously I was keeping a close eye and interest in what was happening in the House of Representatives. Although I wasn't awake at 4:30 a.m. in the morning when the final vote occurred there. Look, it was in a sense disappointing, very disappointing, that we have not been able to establish a religious discrimination bill. But I suppose I always try and see the positives about things. And look, things could have turned out much worse this week in Canberra. There were grave risks if it had have come to the Senate that we would have taken a huge backward step, in my view, in removing protections for Christian schools or other religious schools to decide who attends the school. Because I think, well, absolutely, children with issues around gender and sexuality deserve to have access to schools and institutions that support them. I think every parent in this country has the right to send their children to a school who shares their values and beliefs and imposes certain standards and behaviours among the student body. So the amendments that were made in the House of Reps with Labor, with the Greens, with the Independents, and yes, some moderate Liberal MPs, those amendments would have stripped all the rights away from those parents, and that would have been much worse than the corresponding benefit of the Religious Discrimination Bill. So the right decision, I think, was made to not proceed with it through the Senate at this stage, but the fight goes on to make sure we do have proper protections for religious freedom in Australia.
Yeah, it was pretty ironic, wasn't it, Matt, that a bill which was supposed to protect Christian schools and Christians in general from what we're seeing is some fairly hostile attacks on Christians, particularly because of our beliefs around the timeless view of marriage, gender, those sort of things, Christian sexual ethics. This bill was actually amended in a way that would have stripped away those freedoms from Christian schools and from those parents who want to have their children educated that way. So it's heartening to see that you've recognised that, Matt. How did the narrative get away from us, do you think? You're an observer of the political discourse. For anyone watching this debate, you would have thought that Christians were looking for some mechanism to beat up on gay and transgender kids. That was the narrative that came through the media loud and clear, yet the truth of the matter is almost impossible to break through in the public square.
Well, I suppose, Lyle, I think one thing that is, in my view, contributes to this situation is myself, and I'm guilty of this sometimes, and others of us in the debate here, spend too much time on the back foot, too much time playing defence. So we're simply always responding to issues like the treatment and respect for children who have questions about their gender, rather than talking about the positive things that Christian and religious schools do provide. And so we fell into a bit of a spiral and a trap in the last couple of weeks around responding to the particular issues around the City Point Christian school in Brisbane on that issue, and we're constantly on the defensive. Whereas, I was thinking and reflecting on this week that, for my mind, if we want to talk about the mental health issues and other problems young people in this country face, yes, I want to see an environment framework that helps all children, those who are questioning or worried about their sexuality. Yes, want to see that. It's part of our community and country. But I think a bigger issue across the board is the lack of strong male role models in many children's lives. Kids need a dad, and that basic right to a father, or don't see their father much in their lives. And we don't have enough male teachers in school. Only about 10% of teachers are male across our school systems. And it is often the religious and Christian schools that provide greater discipline often and standards and behaviour that do, if you want to use the term, and I'll be criticised for this, but the masculine term of providing a set of structures and framework that so many kids need, especially young boys. And so, we need to spend more time talking about those positive aspects, about what Christian schools, what schools with high standards help bring to a child's upbringing, and less time on the back foot defending issues that are highly charged, highly emotional, and will just see us we'll just see our freedoms and rights chipped away at if that's all we talk about.
Yeah. No, good on you, Matt. I think a lot of our audience will be pleased to hear you say that. And you put up a very bold statement on Facebook to that effect, talking about the need for male role models. And we saw the Labor MP, Stephen Jones, give a very emotional speech, which I think did influence a lot of your colleagues about his own son, who wears high heels and has handbags and, identifies in a gender ambiguous sort of way. What sort of impact did Stephen Jones' speech about his son have in the Parliament?
I'm going to have to plead ignorance on this one. I haven't seen the speech and wasn't really in direct communication with those of my colleagues that either were considering or did end up crossing the floor on this issue. So, yeah, I really don't know the exact impact it had. But this is some of the problems. I suppose I was reflecting on that, although I did see the reports and what have you, and I was reflecting on it. I thought, look, it's yeah, some of these debates do get wrapped up very with highly charged emotion. That's understandable. We're all human beings. But it is dangerous, I think, when you're trying to pass laws that affect so many people that you're effectively doing it through anecdotes, not broader experience that all people experience. Because let's face it, our mainstream media are constantly purveying and pushing a certain agenda on these issues, most of them at least. Whereas, I always have this contradiction when I return home from Canberra. The discussion and I hear in Rockhampton is very, very different from what is going on down there.
That's right.
And as I say, I wish Stephen Jones's child all the best. I certainly cannot put myself into their shoes, but I also want a country which respects the rights of other parents to form their own groups, around their beliefs, their religion. How they believe children should be raised. That should be their parents' right. And what gets lost in this debate is that, in my view, there's no right that every child with every outlook should have every right to go to every school in the country. We should have a system which allows everyone to access a school and have an educational upbringing in the way they choose. But we should also let people decide, okay, this school is going to have certain dress standards, it's going to have certain hair standards. It's going to have certain standards of behavior, and parents come together as a group to form that school. And ultimately, they use this terrible word called exclusion. They do exclude others from that school. But I love the old saying that good fences make for good neighbours, that we'll all get along and have a better country if we actually respect the differences between ourselves. And I've got no problem with people having a different religious outlook, different ethical outlook. You can all be Australians and still have that. But we'll have a better country, a more unified country, if we actually respect each other. It's okay, you want to go do that with your children and they have their education that way, go for your life. Great. But stop trying to look over your neighbour's fence and tell them what to do every day of the week.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, the overwhelming majority of Christian schools don't want to exclude anyone, but they do want to create an environment where the standards of the parent community and their deeply held religious beliefs and views about gender and marriage and sexual ethics are allowed to be taught freely. And anyway, it's good the bill was withdrawn. Obviously, this is going to be a debate going through the election into the other side. It's far from being resolved in our nation. The other gender issue that was brought up in the Parliament, in the Senate this week, was a bill by your colleague, Senator Claire Chandler, to save women's sports. Was that? Did she have the opportunity to speak on that? And what was the reaction to that bill? I presume it's a private senator's bill. It's not a government bill.
Yes, that's right. That's right, Lyle. It's a private senator's bill. Look, all that happened this week was Claire introduced it. It's the first stage, the first reading of the bill. There was no debate, but that's the usual process. Doesn't become debated immediately. It lays on the table a bit so people can consider it. Obviously, there won't be time before the next election to fully consider Claire's bill, but it's a good first step here. And the reaction in our party room, in the coalition party room, was very much that this is a great initiative from Claire's, that we do need to protect women and women in sport from unfair competition. I mean, it's very similar to the debate we were just having before, that those that are transgender, I think absolutely should find a way for them to participate in sports, compete against each other, etc. But it's completely unfair to have people who only yesterday were men and have high testosterone levels, certain body and skeletal structures, and then put them in against women who they'll just thrash. And it'll be the death of women's sport if this keeps going the way it's going. And I don't want to see that. Women's sports made such great strides in recent years. And just as we're getting to that, we face this issue which could just undermine it all. So
Yeah.
that's just common sense. I was actually here with the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, today, encouraging him in the car that we should get on to Claire's bill. We should make that government
Absolutely.
policy because it's just common sense, and
Yep.
it should be done.
I reckon, Matt, the political party that goes to this election saying they're going to save women and girls sports from the intrusion of biological males will win the election. So, the Nationals could form government off the back of this, Matt. That's my 2 cents worth. Matt, the other big issue in the Senate, and this was very much under the radar this week, and thank you for pointing this out to me off air, but this issue of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, mitochondrial technology, so 3-parent babies. Tell us about that.
Yeah, look, it is an issue that hasn't gained a lot of attention, but I do think there are very serious implications of the legalization of babies born from genetic material from 3 people. And if I can indulge you with a brief description of what this issue is some people among us have a disease called mitochondrial disease. It means that they cannot process food and energy into your normal way. Most of us can lead to lots of debilitating conditions, even death in some cases. And so it's a terrible thing. And people with mitochondrial disease, it's a genetic disorder. So they if it's a severe form of the disease, it's risky to have a child. You may pass it on to your child. And we obviously, and I said this in my contribution, I think we as Christians in particular can deeply understand the human urge and desire to have a genetic child. Like, adoption's great. Surrogate parenting can now happen. But there is something innate in us that want to have a child and pass on our legacy through our genes almost. But unfortunately, people in that situation can't. And here, potentially, with the modern technology, we can overcome this issue. What happens here is potentially, if this bill goes through, we'll be legalizing the technique that would either at an egg stage with an egg or with an embryo fertilized by 2 fertilized eggs, allow the transfer of genetic material between 2 females, effectively female donors. You get your mitochondria from your mum, so the transfer occurs on that female line. And I've got 2 concerns with this, 2 main concerns. One, there's the pro-life ethical concern here that under some of these processes we'll be fertilizing 2 eggs, creating, in my view, 2 lives through artificial insemination. And in that case, the genetic material is transferred from one embryo to another, and then the one with the we've taken the material out of the embryo there, that life is destroyed, is discarded, and in effect, it's. Some of my colleagues think, well, we've done IVF, so why can't we do that? And of course, you lose a lot of embryos in IVF. But there's something different about the intention of this one. In the case of IVF, it's not the intention at the start of it to destroy all the embryos. You create an excess to some of which will go through to a functioning life. In this case, you are creating a life with the absolute intention to use it as a tool or an instrument to help save another life. Like, I think it's a very dangerous ethical approach to deep public policy conditions that we would somehow sacrifice one life to help another life. It's a very utilitarian approach that is completely at odds with the natural law approach that most Christians, but other ethicists non-Christian ethicists would take. And I think we should protect life. And therefore, I've tried to amend the bill, and indeed the amendment's up before the Senate now. We didn't get to vote on it, to remove that method. Right. I've got another ethical concern here about gene therapy. We could talk for a long time. There's a whole lot of implications here because the techniques developed here could do a lot more in the future than just remove this debilitating disease around mitochondria. It could be used ultimately to deal with other diseases, of course, that are genetic in nature, and or even this doesn't do that. This bill doesn't approve this, but it could in the future lead to the techniques that help us determine what height, what weight, what muscle structure you have. And that to me is very, very concerning, moving to this transhumanism sort of agenda. That's another reason why I don't think we should proceed down this path.
These bioethical issues and these technological issues are huge. There's a real ethical issue here. I mean, I take your pro-life point about creating a human embryo, then destroying it, that utilitarian thing, and obviously I don't think that should ever be done. But this idea that a child should be created with genetic material from 3 adults, again, that's, apart from those other concerns you raised, that is really, I think, that's impinging on the rights of the child somewhere. And as much as we all want to help people have children and mitigate disease and use technology for that, we've got to have in mind the ethical considerations. And it seems like we're crossing ethical lines here.
Well, look, and I absolutely agree with that. Keep in mind, this is different from an organ transplant or what have you, which only affects the donor and receiver. In this case, the human germline will be modified forever and a day. You'll pass on that genetic material from 3 people through the generations. I should just raise it. In this case, you are transferring something called the mitochondrial DNA, which is not in your nucleus of your DNA. The mitochondrial DNA does not affect your hair color, eye color, etc.
Okay.
The point is here, the techniques that are developed could be used to do those very things in the future. So it raises a lot of concerns. And what I'm really worried about, a broader point here, particularly as we come out of the COVID pandemic, is that this legislative structure we're setting up, it actually exempts these processes from the gene technology regulator. We've also tried to amend the bill to correct that. It's effectively, we're providing the scientists with self-regulation here. They get to regulate how this is done through the National Health Medical Research Council, which is an advisory body made up of scientists. And what really concerns me, Lyle, is that through the Senate, a lot of senators opposed to my and others' position through this debate took the view that somehow scientists are infallible and, we don't need to or should not question their judgment, even moral or otherwise, about these issues going forward. We don't need regulation because they're very smart and they know what they're doing and they're scientists. Just trust the science. Now, have these people been watching what's happened over the past 2 years? We've just had a pandemic that almost certainly, in one way or another, was created by science. We've had a situation where the regulation of science in the Wuhan Institute of Virology was defective, and that's putting it mildly. We've had a situation where our own scientists in the Australian CSIRO were cooperating with people in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and there almost was no oversight or questioning of this until after the terrible pandemic was unleashed. We must have much greater oversight and regulation coming out of this pandemic of what actually is going on in our fantastic scientific institutions. These people are great. They're just not infallible.
So Matt, well, let's come back to the pandemic and the issues out of that in a second. But just on that mitochondrial bill that you're seeking to have amended, given that we're in the run-up to the election, what are the chances of your amendments being passed? There's only limited sitting time left for the Senate, or is this going to be kicked on till after the election?
I imagine it will be resolved before the election. There's 2 Senate sitting days left. We have, I think, 2.5 amendments left to go through. But the votes have been very close. There was 1 vote. We only lost by 1 vote on the amendments. We haven't got any amended just yet. But look, if your listeners or viewers are concerned about this, please contact your local senator. It's in the Senate, so contact your senators. And as I say, look, I think the overall bill will go through. That's not going to be stopped. But we could amend the bill to deal with the life issues I mentioned, start with techniques that involve just eggs, not embryos. And also encourage your senators to support proper regulation of these procedures. There should be non-scientific bioethicists who are overseeing this. There should be proper arm's length regulation, because I don't want another gain of function disaster unleashed on the world. There needs to be some control here.
Good on you, Matt, for raising this. I mean, I must admit, I didn't even know this was happening until you mentioned it to me this week. And we'll keep an eye on this as this goes through these last couple of sitting days of the Senate. Matt, I know your time's short. The vaccine mandates, we've been talking about freedom of religion and freedom of speech and all these things look, I'm not anti-vax or anything like that, but I am concerned with so much of the misinformation and the coercion, and I've really appreciated your stance on mandates. What is the state of freedom in this country? And do you despair with the way that the discourse has gone over this issue?
I am very disappointed, frustrated, but freedom is down but not out, Lyle. I do think we're going to get our country back. I remain an optimist here, and I know that's very frustrating. I know it's very frustrating, and for some people can see it as the impossibility through the darkness here that has descended across our country with these mandates and restrictions that are stopping people from work. I mean, the main reason I've come out hard against the mandates is not because you can't go get a cup of coffee if you don't have a vaccine passport. It's because you can't provide for your family. Some people have been denied the ability to work, and that's a fundamental right that I think we should protect in this country. It's broader than just freedom, and you have the right, through hard work, through your efforts, to put bread on the table for your family. And governments in this country have cruelly taken that right away from people, stripped it away from people without a very good reason at all, because we can see the vaccines aren't stopping coronavirus in any material way. But look overseas, Lyle. Look overseas. I think we're a bit behind. We're a bit behind this issue because we didn't have a major outbreak until a couple of months ago. And so other countries that have gone through coronavirus spreads much more than us, a lot of their stuff's being dismantled. Overnight, the UK government had already announced mandates were gone, but they overnight also announced that all COVID restrictions would end within a couple of weeks, including requirements to isolate if you have COVID. So that's a major sea change. Denmark have done the same. Many states in the US have already done that or are moving in this direction. And I think it's only a matter of time. As long as we keep it up, like keep pushing, keep raising these issues, I think we'll get there in Australia too.
Is that the sense you get? I mean, you've been in Canberra this week. Is that the discussion amongst your colleagues in the party room that we're heading in a trajectory now where we'll soon see masks not required, QR codes gone, mandates gone, and life back to normal as it is in places like Denmark and others that are just dropping all restrictions? I mean, they're doing that in the middle of winter. We're in the middle of summer.
I mean, look, I know the Prime Minister is getting attacked by everybody now, but he has publicly said he's not supportive of mandates. The federal government has not imposed these issues. So all of my colleagues do want to return to that and do think we should. Yeah. I do think, if I'm going to make a political point, that the real risk for this is the election of a Labor government. That there's no doubt that Labor have been much more in favour of lockdowns, vaccine mandates, all of these sort of restrictions through the pandemic. And Anthony Albanese-led federal government will be teaming up. We'll be working in tandem with Daniel Andrews in the National Cabinet to potentially sustain these things longer than they need to be. I mean, keep in mind, New South Wales, they have not had vaccine mandates apart from a very brief period. But once they hit 95% vaccination, they got rid of those. They're not coming back. They've largely freed up most other restrictions as well. I think that offers the best hope. And I realise others will be disappointed in us and may not put us number one. But
can we just address that issue of the disappointment? Yeah, just finally, Matt, before you go, that issue of the disappointment that many Conservatives have with the Morrison government. I think a lot of Christians are disappointed as well. Peter Credlin touched on this in a recent column in The Australian, where she said, look, we're all very disappointed, and she's a high-profile Conservative, Liberal, blue blood, Tony Abbott's former Chief of Staff, and she's saying, despite the disappointment, vote for the Liberal Party because, as you said, it's going to be much worse under Labor. They are far more woke, and I agree with that. What would you say to disillusioned Christians and Conservatives who feel a lot of disappointment over what's happened in the last 3 years?
Well, what we've got to do primarily is support those people within the Liberal National Party that support those values and get behind them because, I mean, I've been through a few or on the end of a few bruising losses within the Liberal National Party over the few months, going beyond just the vaccine mandates into climate policy, etc. And some people have expected, because you haven't got your way, why don't you just leave the party? And that's the wrong approach in my view. It's absolutely wrong because, good luck to the other parties running around, but they're not going to form government. They're not actually going to be in control of these things. All of the restrictions and all of the issues that come through the coronavirus pandemic have happened by governments. There's been no legislation. It hasn't gone through. Pauline Hanson hasn't got a vote on vaccine mandates or all these other issues. They've all been done through acts of parliament that give governments that power. So we've got to get into government. We've got to get into government, and we've got to change these things. And that means getting involved in one of the parties of government. So get involved in the Liberal National Party. Join the party. You can decide in pre-selections who ends up going to Canberra and support those people that support your values and beliefs. That's the way we turn this thing around. And at this election, there are plenty of good people who are fighting on these issues and want to see them turn around. I'm here in Central Queensland campaigning with a guy called Colin Boyce at the moment, Senator Flynn. It's going to be key to determine the election. Get behind him, support him. He's got exactly the same views as I had. All of these things. I need him in Canberra. I need him in the party room supporting me.
Yeah. No, good on you, Matt. Look, I obviously agree with that. My dalliances in minor party politics, but
that didn't work out, eh?
Oh well, I'm still hanging in there, but I do agree with you, and I endorse what you're saying. I think people need to get involved. If it's with a minor party, so be it. But whatever. But certainly, I agree with the strategy of getting involved with the major parties like the Liberals and Nationals. Matt, I think so many Australians are really Grateful for your presence, your voice in the media on Sky News and other places. You're one of the last voices of reason, and the way you put forward conservative and not afraid of your Christian viewpoints is very much appreciated, I know, as by my audience. So thank you so much for being with us today on the Macquarie Street Political Podcast.
Thanks, Lyle. Thanks for the time, mate. Have a great weekend.
You too.